Your mouth feels clean, your throat refreshed. The finest leaf tobacco, mild, refreshing menthol, and the world's most thoroughly tested filter. That's Snow Fresh Filter Cool. Why don't you switch from hot to the Snow Fresh coolness of cool?
Weeds just make me rattlesnake mad. Now Roundup has a new sharpshooting wand. I'm sending them weeds to the great beyond. No need to pump, just point and shoot. Hit 'em in the leaves and it kills to the root. Round fences, trees, even mulched beds. Cause the only good weed is a weed that's dead.
Hi, my name is Jerry Croth. I'm a professor at Santa Clara University, graduate division. And I've made 4 other propaganda videos, and about 300,000 people have watched them. So today we're talking about Roundup and Monsanto. So a little background. Roundup is an herbicide, one of the most potent ever developed. It kills a lot of vegetation. And there are products that have been made that have been genetically engineered to withstand the toxicity of Roundup. Corn, soybeans, alfalfa, canola, cotton. When they say Roundup Ready alfalfa, they mean the alfalfa does not, Mother Nature did not make this alfalfa. This alfalfa has been engineered to withstand this toxic herbicide. That's why it's ready. It's Roundup Ready. It's ready to be sprayed. Okay? So, here's how it works. Roundup is technically called glyphosate, It enters the leaves, stems, gravitates to the roots of a plant, killing it thoroughly. It kills virtually everything. Roundup, quote, is a non-selective herbicide that kills all vegetation. Oh, that's a sweeping statement. According to Newsweek, quote, it is the most heavily used agricultural chemical in the history of the world. About 300 million pounds of glyphosate are applied each year. Whoa. Now, the question arises. If soybeans are harvested and turned into baby formula, and then a baby eats that or drinks that soy-based baby formula from Roundup Ready soybeans, is that okay? A soybean field has been sprayed between 2 and 4 times with Roundup. And between 88 to 92% of all soy in the United States is GM soy. So there's a high probability that baby is ingesting soy milk that has been sprayed 2 to 4 times with a toxic herbicide. Okay. Between 0 and 3 years of age, the brain undergoes an amazing period of development, continues to grow. It produces 700 new neural connections every second. So with that backdrop, this child is ingesting this substance. Now the government, Monsanto, the EPA, the FDA, says it's okay. It's okay for human consumption. But it would cause you to wonder, wouldn't it? Okay, so we wonder, but those are our doubts. So approaching this subject, if you notice, since 1990, that'll be a critical year. That's when they started spraying Roundup. Heart disease is down 20% since 1980. I mean, heart disease deaths are down 20%. Oh, we have stents, we have statin drugs, we have better education, better treatment, and congratulations to us. The same is true with cancer. Its rate of death is down 25%. Again, better treatment, better knowledge, better skills, better care. Wonderful. But there are some diseases that are increasing since 1990. There are 12 diseases that are mysteriously increasing since 1990. Now that on your upper left in the corner of your screen is Roundup, and how often Roundup starts getting sprayed in earnest around 1990 and has increased 200 times since that time. Well, there have been some diseases that have paralleled that process. Lymphoma, kidney failure, breast cancer, asthma, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, thyroid cancer, Crohn's disease, Alzheimer's. They have all gone up and all gone up rather mysteriously. So here you see population increasing 1.3 times since 1990. But lymphoma, kidney failure, and breast cancer are up twice as much, more than population. Why? We don't understand why. What are the causes? Celiac disease, thyroid cancer, asthma and Parkinson's and MS. Notice Parkinson's and MS are neurological. They're up 2.5 times more, and while population is only up 1.3 times. Celiac disease, thyroid cancer, almost 3 times more than 1990. Crohn's disease, 5 times more. Alzheimer's, 10 times more than 1990. Autism, 22 times more than 1990. What is going on? What is the cause? No one knows. We speculate. There are scientific studies. There are no answers yet. So, since this is a bit of a controversial talk, every once in a while I'm going to show you the references that support this. I'm just not making this stuff up. So, I teach research methods at the graduate division at my university occasionally, and I teach my students about correlations. They do not mean things are caused. They mean things are related. If one variable goes up and the other variable goes up with it, that's interesting. It's statistically significant, but it doesn't mean that that causes that, always. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily. It's kind of like guilt by association. So some correlations are really funny, like the divorce rate in Maine is positively correlated to the per capita consumption of margarine. Does that mean if you're getting divorced, you have this incredible need to eat margarine? Or does it mean that if you're eating margarine, you're putting your marriage at risk? Neither. Okay? That's not the story. Okay? It's just a coincidence, but it's a statistically significant coincidence. But some correlations are really, really important. The number of cigarettes smoked and lung cancer in the 50s and 60s, the correlations were known, but the causality had not been established with animal studies. But there was a strong correlation between the consumption of cigarettes and deaths from lung cancer. So correlations are important. Now look at some of these correlations. This is a correlation between Roundup or glyphosate and autism. The orange line is glyphosate and the yellow is autism. And they go together, don't they? The correlation is 0.98. Now, a correlation goes from 0 to 1 or 0 to -1. It doesn't go above 1. So 985 is like, as Trump would say, huge, a huge positive correlation. They're going together. Okay? The more you spray, the more autism you get. We cannot imply causality, but we can sure notice this coincidence. Here's celiac disease in Roundup, correlation 0.97. Thyroid cancer in Roundup, correlation 0.98. Deaths from kidney disease and Roundup, 0.96. One goes up, the other goes up. The less the spraying, the fewer cases. The more the spraying, the more the cases. We cannot assume one causes the other. That's the danger of correlations, okay? So it's guilt by association. Like, let's say that O.J. Simpson is accused of murder, and you're a friend of O.J. Simpson's and used to hang around with him all the time. You're correlated with O.J. So does that mean you're an accessory to the crime? Does that mean that you also murdered those people? That you are an accomplice? Well, you are a person of interest to the police. That's what a correlation is. It's sort of like creating a person of interest. Monsanto and Roundup are persons of interest or entities of interest. But let's give Monsanto's case. Let's do our best to put Monsanto's case in perspective. If I was a Monsanto spokesman, I would say, hey, wait a minute, don't dump these 12 cases, 12 diseases on us. Okay? Take a look at that graph. That blue line represents ragweed, and the yellow represents CO2. We're talking about global warming here. Global warming, CO2 produces more ragweed. More ragweed creates more respiratory illnesses like asthma and allergies. So don't blame it on us. There are other things that correlate with these diseases, not just Roundup. don't blame us for something that you cannot prove belongs. All right. So Scott Partridge, Monsanto vice president, said the very long and well-established history of safe glyphosate use over 40 years in more than 160 countries shows clearly that these claims are supported neither by the science nor the facts. All right. 1999 reviews on the safety of glyphosate and Roundup herbicide that have been conducted by several regulatory agencies and scientific institutions worldwide have concluded there is no indication of any human health concerns. Thank you, Monsanto. That's one person's one case presented. Fine. But then there's the people's case, and it has a different coloring. The people are saying these diseases, these 12 diseases, are increasing and correlated to Roundup spraying. There will be 64,000 new cases of thyroid cancer this year that probably would not have existed in 1990. New cases of celiac disease. 500,000 people will come down with Alzheimer's. 1.6 million will be diagnosed with autism, which according to the CEDC is the fastest growing disability in the United States. 75,000 new cases of lymphoma. 2 million emergency room visits because of asthma. 60,000 new cases of Parkinson's disease each year now. 38,000 new cases of Crohn's disease. 252,000 new cases of breast cancer, 10,000 cases of multiple sclerosis, and food allergies. So if you add it all up, that's 4.6 million people this year who are going to come down with these diseases that might not have come down with them in 1990. Now, the people's case, if this represents the people, this is an organization that is sponsoring a signature campaign to ask the EPA and the FDA to stop the spraying of Roundup. Well, there's a long distance between here and there. There's a lot of money involved in this. But they quote an MIT researcher in their campaign to stop Monsanto's Roundup. And their MIT researcher says, I'm certain at this point that glyphosate is the most important factor in an alarming number of epidemic diseases. All right, so we have two stories, but we don't have proof. We don't have cause and effect yet. There are a few studies. The Journal of Food and Chemical Toxicology did a 2-year study that fed rats GMA maize, corn, sprayed with Roundup. They died 2 to 3 times more than the control rats who didn't. They had more tumors, more liver and kidney issues than the controls. Well, that gets closer to causality. Roundup was twice as lethal on the death of amphibians as other pesticides. Another study, glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup weed killer, causes fatty liver disease in laboratory rats at very low doses. The study is unique in that it is the first to show a causative link between the consumption of Roundup and a serious disease. Well, that's a causative study. There are lots more that have to be done for one to make that scientific statement that Roundup does cause these things. There's a lot more research that has to be done. Now, outside of science and research, there are things that have happened in the last 3 years that are really causes for alarm. Here are a few. 2013, there's an amendment to a funding bill. It's called the Monsanto Protection Act. Most people didn't even notice it was tucked in the language of this much larger bill, and it gives Monsanto generous legal protections against litigation. President Obama signed it. In 2013, Monsanto was one of the largest contributors to Congress, spending $6.9 million. According to one source, quote, Monsanto outspends all other agribusinesses on efforts to persuade Congress and the public to maintain the industrial status quo. In 2015, the World Health Organization determined that Roundup was a, quote, probable human carcinogen. Ooh. Now, think about that baby who's having that soy infant formula. And now the World Health Organization says that's a probable human carcinogen. In 2015, President Obama appointed Michael Taylor to head the Food and Drug Administration. Michael Taylor was a lobbyist for Monsanto. And now he's the head of the agency that is supposed to protect us from poisons and toxins. Isn't that the fox guarding the hen house, Mr. President? Now, this story is scary, and I hope this comes from the people who are suing Monsanto. An official named Jess Rowland, who worked for the EPA, the government, not Monsanto. He was doing a study on whether Roundup caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he was quoted as telling a Monsanto executive, "If I can kill this, I should get a medal." Well, they're quoting him a lot about that statement, and Rowland's study concluded that glyphosate has no relationship to cancer. In 2016, a quiet FDA study revealed that there's residue of Roundup that is found on infant oatmeal cereal. It was found on Ritz crackers. It was found on Kellogg's Special K, and it was found on chocolate cookies. Residue, you're actually getting a few parts per billion. In 2017, Monsanto was accused of ghostwriting academic papers on the safety of Roundup. It was alleged that the EPA was unaware of Monsanto's deceptive authorship practice. Well, there are some more sources to back up those statements. So, an interim conclusion is we're not indicting Monsanto. In my view, the science is not there to make that statement. But if you were to talk about the issue of probable cause, is there a sufficient amount of data that has been collected that makes you think there is sufficient reason to study this issue? I mean, if the World Health Organization says it's a problem, doesn't that mean that the United States government, through the FDA or the NSF, should make a massive effort to study this question for the American people without scientists from Monsanto or scientists from the other side, but independent scientists with no conflicts of interest? That to me is a rational, reasonable conclusion. It needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. Now, this is a story about propaganda, right? That's the title of this talk. So where's the propaganda, Jerry? Well, let's talk about propaganda now. I like to use a certain database, a reference, when I do work on literacy. It's called the Vanderbilt Television Archives. They have videotaped, recorded, archived virtually every evening news television broadcast back to the 80s. So if you want to look up Brian Williams, who was talking about something, you can find it here. You could even buy a videotape of that show. So to use this, you enter a search term in that little box. So I typed in Roundup, and there it is. Roundup was a commercial on CBS Evening News, May 10th, 2014, at 5:45 p.m., and it was a commercial for Roundup that appeared on that evening news show. Okay, that's interesting information. So I went back to 2010. There were 220 entries for Roundup in the last 7 years. 220 times Roundup has appeared on primetime news broadcasts. But this one was a commercial that appeared on NBC Evening News at 5:42 p.m. Okay? So the question is, in my other propaganda talks, I talked about techniques of propaganda, and one of them was called distraction and denial, meaning take a look over here because we don't want you to look over here. Distraction and denial. So all of these things are going to keep your mind busy while this is not going to be seen, and it's going to come under the veil of denial. Well, let's take a look at Roundup commercials versus Roundup news stories in the last 7 years on the evening news. Well, about 217 commercials for Roundup appear in that database, and 3 stories. 3 actual stories about Roundup. One of them was in Oregon, they had difficulty exporting wheat to Japan because it was sprayed by Roundup. The question is, are we having so few stories about Roundup because the news broadcast companies do not want to bite the hand that feeds them? After all, that's 217 commercials for the evening news that appeared. So, more distraction and denial. Here are some stories that happened in the same 7-year period that if you're watching the television news, you're a couch potato, you watch it all the time. What's going into your head? Well, there were about 220 stories of rape. Okay? Steubenville, Ohio, Colorado. These are stories about rape. There were stories about Bill Cosby, 180 stories about Bill Cosby and his issue with women and drugging women and having sex with women he allegedly drugged. Then there's the story of Anthony Weiner, a congressman, bright, intelligent, articulate fellow, but he takes a picture of himself in his underwear with a swollen genitals behind the underwear, and he thinks he's sending it to a girl. He's married, but he's sending it to a lady, presses the wrong button, and it goes out to the world. He apologizes, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again, and then it happens again. The Kardashians, I have no idea what they do. They're always in the news, but are they actresses or actors or sports figures or do they sing or dance? I do not know what the Kardashians do, but they seem to always be in the news. Distraction and denial. Kardashian. O.J. Simpson has been in prison. He hasn't been doing anything except being in prison. He was on the national news 37 times. And poor little Roundup only gets 3 stories in 7 years. So this is a pretty good example of distraction and denial. I'm a psychologist, and I want to know what's behind it. What are we actually doing? What are these themes here? Well, rape and Bill Cosby have to do with sex and violence. Anthony Weiner has to do with sex. The Kardashians have to do with sex and celebrity. O.J. Simpson has to do with murder. Murder, sex, violence, celebrity. That's Pulp Fiction. That's what you find in romance novels. That's what you find on the National Enquirer. This is the evening news with Scott Pelley. And what are we watching? Are we really watching reality? Or are we watching the reality that they choose to entertain us with and distract us with? I think that's a very legitimate question. For every single story about Roundup, there were 275 sexy stories about murder and fame and how the Kardashians half naked here and half naked there. Evening news. So who are the people who are responsible for this? Who's bringing us this stuff? Okay, who are the presidents of those news networks? Well, there they are. Those are the guys who are in charge of telling you about the real world. They reach 27 million people every evening. These 5 white males sit around a desk, probably, with their executive producers, and Scott Pelley's right there with them, and they say, what are we going to tell the American people tonight? What stories will we tell them in the 22 minutes of their consciousness that we have? Will we be reporting on the famine in the Sudan? Or should we do the story on rape in Steubenville, Ohio? So they're making those decisions for us. Okay? Now, are you saying, is that fake news? Well, I don't think it's fake news. There are 170,000 rapes every year, 473 rapes every day to choose from. You don't have to fake it. If you want to show a story about rape, you've got a lot to choose from. No reason to make it up. 223 primetime features on rape since 2010. Is that representative of all the rapes in the country? I don't think so. There were only 29 stories of black women who were raped in those last 7 years, who made primetime evening news. 1 in 5 black women in this country has been raped. Okay? This is not representative of the academic study of rape. These are stories that have hooks, that have something cute about them. A group of white army recruits raped this woman. Now, that could be a story. A Facebook rape where somebody filmed the rape on Facebook. That's a good story. But a run-of-the-mill rape we're not interested in. So even our stories of rape are distorted. They're not representative of the rapes that occur in this country. So the bottom line here is not that our evening news is bringing us reality. It is not. It is a profit center. Here is a graph. I hope you can see it. At the top is the Big Bang Theory, one of the most popular shows on American television. At the bottom, the Carrie Diaries, or whatever that is. And this is how much they charge for a 30-second commercial. So if you have a show that has a large market share, many viewers, the Big Bang Theory charges over $330,000 for a 30-second advertising spot. Okay? That's where they make their money. The Vampire Diaries, they're not that popular. You can get 30 seconds of commercial time for about $50,000. So the issue is the news media has become a profit center for the networks. And so the number of viewers means more market share, more eyeballs, and more revenue. So NBC is leading the pack currently with some 9 million viewers. And CBS only has 7.5 million. And poor Wolf Blitzer and his moral crusade against political incorrectness, only 1.2 million viewers. So if you want to buy a commercial on NBC's evening news, which is what Monsanto often buys, it costs more money because they have more viewers, and they have more viewers because they have more sensational stories. Now, Ted Koppel was interviewed by Bill O'Reilly, and quite to Bill O'Reilly's suspense, Ted Koppel took a bite out of Bill O'Reilly with something that I completely support.
And you know who made it irrelevant? You did. You have changed the television landscape over the past 20 years. You took it from being objective and dull to being subjective and entertaining.
Yeah. So the news is obviously entertaining, and the consequence of that, however, is that it distorts our perception of the world. So let's say we're one of those 5 guys, white males, sitting around the table with our executive producers, and we're going to say, what story are we going to give them today? Well, there's Bill Cosby. Oh, Flash. Yes, scandal, sensational. Look at all those women. Wow. That's a story with legs. We've done it 180 times. Let's do it 181 times. When there's another story, Roundup. That's a map of the United States and how much the United States has been saturated by this herbicide. Do you want to do a story on how the country has been saturated by what could be a very toxic substance? I don't think so. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have that je ne sais quoi that we're looking for. And besides, they sponsor the evening news. What are you, crazy? So we don't see certain things, and that's what the results of propaganda are. We have distorted perceptions of the world, misperceptions, delusions about global warming, deny we're living in a fog. We have lost contact with reality, and we, as one guy said, we are entertaining ourselves to death and masquerading it as if this is the news of the world. So thank you very much for watching.